How is that to go, yeah, all right, to see that and say, like, yeah.
I mean, before this conversation, I didn't really think much of it because it's just a day-to-day thing. It wasn't until like looking at the numbers and then having that talk with you beforehand, it was just like, wow.
If you were here 20 years ago, sitting right here, you never would have said that, by the way. You never would have said that. Yeah. They're not, this is why the generational differences are really important, because you can't know that. Like, you can't know that. So let me ask you this question. So you go back, you see these three lovely humans here. What do you want to tell them? Like, what would you want to tell them about this? What do you think you don't understand about wealth? 1% of adults around the world control 46% of the global wealth. So if we take, all the adults, which is going to be about less than 6 billion people, and we divide up the wealth and we see how much these people control, the top 1%, they control 46% of all the wealth. And so that means these are people that have $1 million to their name, to their assets, $1 million of assets. Okay, so you take all their assets and you subtract their liabilities, they have $1 million. Then you go down to this other group here, and this is between $100,000 and $1 million. And this includes older people like me and younger adults like you all, okay? And this is average. So then you add in another 39%. So what that means is about 85%. The wealthiest 12% of people in the world control about 85% of all the wealth in the world. The poorest 55% of the people in the world, by contrast, control 1% of the total wealth in the world. The wealthiest 10% of households in the United States control 67% of the wealth. And the bottom 50%, the poorest 50% of people in the United States control about 3% of the wealth. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you see that?
That's a lot of money that, the top 10% control.
When you say it's a lot of money, what are you seeing?
They control like a huge percent of the wealth. Like, that's a lot.
67%.
Yeah. 67%.
Definitely knowing that, or being aware that I am in that bottom 50% being controlling only 3% is definitely small compared to the proportion of the top 10% being 67%. I think it's quite unfair, and it's just not very equal in terms
so you
of
feel,
sharing.
So one thing that comes to mind for you, the first thing is that it's not fair.
Yeah.
And what's not fair about it?
I mean, the majority of that bottom 50% is the working group, and the top 10 is just all probably millionaires, and they just have control of 67% of the wealth. That's all assets.
More so the disparities in wealth and how it's spread out and the different social classes, and the big difference from lower, middle to upper is just so vast.
And for me,
and for
Jaron,
me personally, looking at it, it's kind of wow, how privileged and how blessed I am for my family background to be part of that top 10%.
To be part of that? How is that to go, yeah, all right, to see that and say yeah.
I mean, before this conversation, I didn't really think much of it because it's just a day-to-day thing. It wasn't until looking at the numbers and then having that talk with you beforehand, it was just wow.
All right, y'all who've been out working away, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you see that?
First thing that I think about is the difference in the experience that people have in just going about their business in the world. Some people are just really struggling to do the basic daily things, and other people are not struggling to do those basic things. And
okay, so the first thing is, wow, it's not just the wealth. It's the experience. It's the people's day-to-day experiences and the struggles to survive or making it easy, whatever.
And the last thing I was going to say is this psychological toll I think it takes on people that are struggling to, make ends meet. That kind of thing is a very different experience than the psychological toll of like, what's my ROI on this investment or that, activity.
If you were here 20 years ago, sitting right here, you never would have said that, by the way. You never would have said that. Yeah. They're not, this is why the generational differences are really important, because you can't know that. Like, you can't know that.
I had two thoughts. One was like, just sort of like philosophical, like how random it is to where we are born, what we are born into, and how the circumstances that we are born into are so profoundly impactful on where we end up. Not 100%, that's a generalization, but just like the vagaries of where we're born and that impacts. And then I also thought about, I was looking at the three of you and I was thinking about hope and like, how do you garner hopefulness when you are in the very bottom of that? Like, how is that, what is the psychological experience of that, of being in that and trying to make it in a world where you are not set up for necessarily success, whether it's educational success or financial success, it doesn't matter. Just the disparities in education systems based on the area that you live and the wealth that is in the area that you live and how that creates people who are at different states of readiness for college or post-high school life.
So right here, the three of you. So Nigella, you said, "Hey, I am in the bottom 50%." So it's different. So hope. When you say hope, it's like, well, that's different for her than the other two people. Brian, how about what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Alcohol. Your experience with alcohol through time, right? Like if you grew up in a family where there was wine and you had a taste and you understood what it did, you made smarter decisions about it later in life. I think there are folks, if you have $1 million sitting in an investment that pays 7%, that's $70,000 a year. It's just earning itself. And there are folks who, bust their ass to make less than that. And money's
to make a fraction of that.
So like the wealth earns by itself, kind of, like that. Mm-hmm. And that's something that was, and how you use money. I mean, it's folks who just come into money, they spend it before it's gone. But how do you have an experience with money where you're taking care of it, it's taking care of you, it's taking care of your family,
Mm-hmm. So you meet in your job, you meet a lot of people who just know how to make money work for them, man. And money just works for them, and they know it, and they get it, and they just can't even imagine it otherwise.
They can't imagine how somebody can make some of the decisions with money that that are more common, and it's really experience. It's having grown up around that having the advisors, having wealth is access, right? Income is not wealth. Yeah. So wealth is built over time, and it gives you access. And folks who it really is. It's an experience, and it can hurt you just like alcohol could.
Okay. So let me ask you this question. So you go back, you see these three lovely humans here. What do you want to tell them? What would you want to tell them about this? Like, what would you, if you could, just from your experience and...
So just because I have the mic, and then I'll pass. Think about your future. Sounds so corny. Think about your future self, right? Make your future self. If you don't, what you need tomorrow is more important than what you want today. And if we're talking about wealth and we're talking about, building something, if you put $1 away, $10, and just do that, and you'd be surprised how much further ahead you will be than your peers. And it's so easy to start right now.
Yeah, you put like $5 a day, just $5, let's say $10 a week. By the time you get to my age, you're basically a millionaire. But every little thing that you buy, you go use the machine out there, it's $4, and you go get a bubble tea and it's $7, and it's like, yeah, you just don't do any of that purchasing, you're a millionaire by the time you're old like me.
I was in a situation where like my parents paid for my college. I went to Penn State, in-state, and they were able to afford it. And I always worked part-time in high school, starting 14, always had part-time jobs, but I really wasn't worried about money at your age in that way because my education was covered by my family. So it's a different thing. So I guess I would just say, when you think about, I mean, I agree with what Brian said, but also like when you think about your career path and like the different income points that might lead, that is really important. But I guess, I don't know how to, I left a career where I made a lot more money than I make now. So it feels complicated to just say something about like what you can do to secure your particular financial future. I'm thinking in terms of like, but what are your goals beyond that? And can you find a way to do both? So that you're not just like, that it's not a black or white thing.
What do you think that people don't understand about wealth inequality?
I mean, I'm going to say I also don't understand it because I'm not living in the bottom, like economic bracket. So I'm empathetic, I'm sensitive to it, but it's not my lived experience. So I'm not like the expert, But what I will say is that you talked a lot about white guilt when I was a student and a TA. And I feel like there's also a warning I would give about like wealth guilt. I don't like if you have money and you are fortunate enough, I don't think you need to feel bad about it necessarily. I think you should be aware of it and like sensitive to the fact that you're privileged and other people aren't. But like it's not something to be ashamed of. And I think that's a risk. I think for people to like reject money and that kind of thing. So there's a happy medium.
It's very complex, right? It's very complex when you see the distribution like this that's so different. We know that people have very, very different experiences. It's hard to not feel some kind of way about it. What do you think you don't understand about wealth?
I feel like my biggest question might be like, how do people accumulate so much in their lifetime? Because I feel like you see a lot of people like it's inheritance or stuff like that, but like the future CEOs, the big business owners, like creating that wealth within such small time, like stamp sort of thing. Like I think it's really interesting to see that kind of growth and like how they do it so fast.
Yeah, how do they do that? Like how does that happen? Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't necessarily want to be like wealthy, like top 10%. I just want to be able to get out of that bottom 50% bracket because I think like being wealthy, I don't really associate it with being kind of boastful or like having that pedestal above everyone else. But I feel like being in a financially stable spot is more like my priority rather than being like top wealthy.
And to what degree, to what degree would you say you're on the path to doing that?
I think I'm on a pretty good year. I mean, I'm in Penn State. I'm working towards a pretty secure career.
How much concern do you have about maybe not being able to fully get on the path or stay on that path?
I'm not too concerned. I mean, with the job market, it's a little bit concerning, but I feel like getting past because I'm first generation, so getting past what my parents have already done, I've already passed that, so I'm on a pretty good path.
Is this okay for you? Like, is this okay? Is this like if you were the ruler of this nation, would you say like, yeah, no, this is good, I got it?
Obviously, I feel like it's definitely not okay that people are like fighting to survive and fighting to get by. But at the same time, I feel like it's very hard for everyone to be equal, to make a country, like everyone, like to have the same salary. I feel like, isn't that
well, you don't have to go
difficult?
there.
Oh.
You don't have to go to the same. You just have to go like, is that okay?
It's definitely not okay.
And what would you change? How would you change it?
I honestly have no idea how I would change such a like drastic thing.
I mean, not like, well, like what would be okay? The top 10% would control what percentage of the wealth? And in your mind, you'd say like, yeah, that makes sense. I got that.
I have no idea what to say for that. It's honestly like I have no idea.
How about the bottom 50%?
I'm just gonna say like maybe a random number, maybe like 20, 25, 30. I have no idea.
What should they be able to do?
I mean, I think they should be able to, pay their bills, afford food, and obviously, I feel like it's important to like have extra money to spend on your children, like gifts, clothes. I feel like those are also necessities, and I feel like everyone should, have the opportunity to be able to do that.
At least meet basic needs.
Yeah, of course. But I also
Okay.
think it's important that, if you want to go out and get a latte, you can spend that $8 on a latte. And some people don't ever actually get to be able to do that. I
Okay.
think that's important to mention.
Okay.
Kurt Vonnegut, wealth redistribution. His comment was, wealth is being redistributed all the time in a way that is strikingly unhelpful. And there's other ways to those who need and from those who can provide, I think is a good mantra.
Yeah, so something. I mean, this is a thing, right? We see this kind of thing. Yo, man, top 10%, 2/3 of the wealth. That is just, we can all, people will be like, well, but what? But what?
Well, but are we going to talk about like the regulations and tax structure that help perpetuate
Well, yeah,
create that, or is that
we're not
what
going to
you're
talk
asking?
about that.
Okay.
But the point is, that's all holding it in place. So
Yeah.
the question is just, for you all, having been out in the world, you're working along, you're doing your thing. When you look at that, you see something different than, say, the three of them.